Okay, welcome to another Highland League Weekly Friday preview show ahead of another packed weekend of Breedon Highland League action. 5 league games coming up this weekend, as well as 2 ties in the preliminary round of the GPH Builders Merchants Highland League Cup. It's been a big week for Breedon Highland League news. On Wednesday, we discovered that Banks of D, who were 6th in the table, have been handed a 24-point deduction and are now on -1 point at the bottom of the table. This was due to a player registration issue that also saw Banks of D removed from the Scottish Cup earlier in the campaign. Callum, big blow this for Banks of D.
It is a huge blow, really. That's, they'd only lost one league game in 12, 23 points on the board, ticking along quite nicely, and obviously they've received this penalty. I mean, it's an ineligible player. I believe it's 9 instances across 8 league games, and I think one of the players involved featured in, or when I say featured, that's being in the match day squad. You don't, you can be an unused substitute and you're classed as featuring, but I think there was one player the player in question was involved in 8 league matches, and I mean, a lot of people have sort of said since they think it's a very harsh penalty, and I mean, it's a big penalty to Banks of D, but the rules now are in black and white, really, in that it's 3 points for every game that an ineligible player features in. It's, the Highland League didn't really have anywhere to go with it. It's not like the old days, perhaps, where you might have just gotten a fine, or there maybe wasn't the same consistency in terms of some of the things around this. I mean, after the rules were revised, I think it was 5 years ago, following various instances, and they're now pretty clear that it's 3 points per game, and so 8 games is 24 points. I mean, we've seen, going back, I think it was the first year after the rules had been revised, we had Fort William and Rothes, I think, as well, both had an ineligible player featured in 3 games and they were docked 9 points. So in terms of consistency, again, and by the letter of the law, Banks of D had to be docked the points. I mean, I understand why they'll say it was, it's harsh, and I can, understand everyone's frustration with it, but those are the rules, unfortunately. I mean, it just shows you again how easy something like this can sort of get out of hand. It was just a small thing with registration. The player in question had gone to register through the SFA, and there'd been an email come back saying that he was still, I believe, attached to another club, and that email was missed, and then here we are sort of 3 months down the line, and it's, obviously the outcome's not very good at all for Banks of D, and I've got sympathy for them, and I think everyone across the league will have, really, because, if you're a player, manager, somebody on a committee, fan, it's one of those situations that you just never want your club to be in.
Yeah, Banks of D don't have a game this weekend due to Lossiemouth being in action in the Highland League Cup, but I mean, some people that maybe don't pay much attention to the Highland League might be asking, as is the case in other leagues when this sort of thing happens, whether Banks of D now being on -1 point means they're under threat of relegation. We wouldn't expect that, would we?
I wouldn't expect them to be in. I mean, all logic says there won't be in any danger of finishing bottom. I mean, you look at how they'd done over the last the first 12 games, how many points they'd amassed, and you would expect them to, if anything, probably be more determined to put a lot of points on the board now and get back up in the top half, and trying to, might be a tall order now to try and push for top 6, but I'm sure they'll certainly want to try and get, I think getting back into the top half's a reasonable sort of initial target for them.
Okay, then on to the Highland League games this weekend. Then our main game on Highland League Weekly on Monday is going to be the clash between Turriff United and Brechin City at the Hachs. I suppose in this one, Turriff have shown good signs in the early part of the season, but Brechin will just be looking to stay top of the table.
It's quite simple for Brechin. They're just trying to keep putting the wins together and keep everyone chasing them. Kind of, if they don't drop points, they'll remain top of the league. It's quite clear. Turriff, there's no question in my mind that the best Turriffs are a better side when they get on the front foot and try to attack. I think they're the sort of best sort of part of their team, if you will, is that sort of middle to front. I mean, Aaron Reid and Ewan Clark, they're two strikers. They've got 28 goals between them, and this is only the end of October. So I mean, that's great shooting, really, and they're clearly a threat. But the flip side of that with Turriff as well is when they're having a go, we've seen they're maybe not the most solid defensively, and a team like Brechin, again, with their share of threats, Grady McGrath's got 12 goals for the season, and he's really settled into playing in the Highland League, no problem at all. Mark Scott, we saw last season, had an excellent campaign, and he's started in a similar vein again. So going by that, you would have to start with Brechin as favourites, but if Turriff can keep the back door shut, then there's no question that they carry a threat going forward.
We'll go to Keith against Nairn County next. Two sides, it looks a reasonably tight game on paper. Nairn, after their first win last weekend, they'll be feeling, I suppose, a bit more confident. They also signed Ross Tokley last night, which I suppose is a bit of a surprising signing, given that Ross Tokley, I think, is 43. Manager Steve Mackay is only 41, but what do you think Ross Tokley can bring to the Highland League at this point in his career? Well,
the biggest thing Ross Tokley brings is, or the two biggest things really, is experience and know-how. I mean, he's played almost 600 games for Inverness. Cally Thistle was, I know it's 10 years since he left Cally Thistle, but almost 600 games, helped them through the third division to the Premiership, and was, a mainstay all the time he was there. And I mean, since then he's been at Ross County and then Brora, and he won plenty as a player, and then won a couple of cups as a manager. And I mean, even since he left Brora in 2018, he's sort of gone back to playing in the North Cally League with Tain St Duthis, and he still clearly keeps himself in good condition and in a condition that he's able to play. And Stephen Mackay said as well that he wouldn't have signed him if he wasn't in shape to contribute. And I think if you look at Nairn, the biggest the problems they've had this season really are defensive. Front line with Scott Davidson, Andrew Gregg, Connor Gethins, that'll score goals, but we've seen all too often in games, if they lose the first goal or if they lose a goal, they look very brittle, very fragile. I mean, even on Monday against we saw the highlights against Strathspey, they were 4-0 up, lost 2 goals in 2 minutes, and then it was quite a nervy ending. So I think with somebody like Ross Tokley in your ranks, it's hard to see that happening. And the other thing, just in one small detail as well, is his size and his physical presence and his aerial ability. He's great to have defensively at set pieces in your own box, because really he'll win most things, but also corners, free kicks, etc. going the other way. He's a great player to have to put in the opposition's box and cause them a problem. So, I mean, on paper it looks like it could be an astute signing, and fair play to Ross as well for still having the hunger to all that he's done in his career to want to come back and play in the Highland League, and be interesting to see how he gets on. But in terms of Saturday's game as well, I kind of thought, looking at it, might be a battle of attack versus defence in a way, and that Nairn's probably a bit more potent in the final third, but then not so good at the back, whereas Keith, I think, with their back line, are quite solid, but then they maybe don't score as many goals as Craig Ewan would like, so it'll be interesting to see how that pans out.
Test for Brora Rangers at home to Inverurie on Saturday, but I mean, Brora won last weekend when all the other teams around them were in Scottish Cup action, so they won't want to now, slip up in the next card, will they?
No, it would, if they were to drop points on Saturday, it'd probably feel a bit like one step forward and two back again after the good result against Forest last week. And to be honest, I would expect them to just edge out in Inverurie. I mean, I know they lost to Brechin, but Brora seldom drop many points at home, and it's very cliched to say, but it's never easy going to Dudgeon Park. For Inverurie, I think if they want to be, they've played a couple more games than Brora, but a win would take them to within 2 points, and I think if they want to be in that mix for finishing in the top four, these are the sort of games they need to be taking something from, but ideally winning really with the points they've spilled already this season. So again, it's with the attacking players on show could go either way, but I would just be edging towards Brora.
The two big hitters close to hand, Buckie Thistle and Fraserburgh. Buckie are at home to Forest Mechanics this weekend, while Fraserburgh host Rothes. I mean, again, two testing ones. Forest have shown, that they've got something going this season in the early part of the campaign. Rothes as well in recent matches have started to look more like themselves. Do you see there being any problems for Buckie or Fraserburgh this weekend?
There could be. I mean, realistically, you would probably have to go for 2 home wins if you are making a prediction, but I mean, with Forest against Buckie, first of all, it's a good test for Forest in terms of what they can maybe get out of it, because the Brora away last weekend, now they're away to Buckie, and then Fraserburgh's coming to Mossop Park next weekend, so that's 3 really challenging games, and I think anything they can get out of that wee run would be a bonus. But I mean, in Ben Barron up top, they've got a player that's clearly in really good form, 8 league goals already, 17. He's a real handful. He can give Buckie problems. I mean, if you move on to the Fraserburgh-Rothes game, Rothes, they won at Belsley last season. They're definitely capable. These are the sort of games where Ross Jack always has his side well set up, difficult to play against, and I do think the first goal could be quite big in that game, because if Fraserburgh to get it, and that means Rothes maybe need to open up a wee bit more, that's when Fraserburgh can be very dangerous. I think the Brock as well, they won the Aberdeenshire Cup at the start of the month. They've had that great win last weekend in the Scottish Cup against Stranraer. I think there's a bit of sort of momentum with them now, and they're sort of starting to show the form we know they're capable of, so I would just be edging towards them as well.
You said so many goal scorers in that team. You're probably on tenterhooks wondering what's the second game, Ryan. I forgot to mention. It's Brora Rangers against Inverurie we're going to be at, so we'll have highlights with that one. Just a reminder, we'll also have the highlights and reaction from Turriff against Brechin. Now, 2 ties, as I mentioned, in the GPH Builders Merchants Highland League Cup preliminary round. Strathspey Thistle against Lossiemouth. Strathspey get a bit of respite from the league. Lossiemouth, though, to me, the way Lossiemouth have been going this season, looks like an opportunity for them, this competition, to maybe, try and push for a cup final, try and push for some silverware, even.
I think it's an opportunity for both sides, Ryan, but I think the first thing with Strathspey is you can't keep conceding 3, 4, 5 goals, because you're not going to win games. I mean, they don't need me to tell them. Everyone's at Strathspey is acutely aware that's where the issue is at the moment, because they've shown in plenty of games they can cause teams problems. For Lossie, as you said, they've done quite well in the league. They're a bit unlucky the last couple of weeks. 2 last-minute goals has cost them points at Clach and Inverurie. And I mean, they got to the North of Scotland Cup semi-final. It'd be good to see them get through it if they could get through a few rounds and see what they can do, because I think it's sides like Lossiemouth, the sort of teams that are in the middle of the table that, having a good run in a cup, reaching a final, or even winning something, it turns a decent season into potentially one of the best in the club's history.
Wick against Fairmartin's the final game to discuss this week on the Friday preview show. That's also in the preliminary round of the GPH Builders Merchants Highland League Cup. Wick, big Scottish Cup win last weekend. Another cup game this weekend. Are Wick the cup specialists? Can they dispatch for Martin, or Martin going to be strong?
Might be able to tell you better on on Monday, because although they've had joy in the Scottish Cup, they were knocked out the North of Scotland Cup at the first hurdle. I think what you're saying there, it makes it quite a big game for Wick, because they're 13th in the table. I think so. Realistically, they're not winning the league. So alongside the Scottish Cup, if they can get through the League Cup and sort of keep that interest and excitement in that competition, it potentially gives you something to play for on the more than just the league games in the months ahead. So it'd be good. But for Martin, I mean, the last 5, 6, 7 years, they've traditionally been a pretty good cup team. They have been again this season. Third round of the Scottish Cup. Final of the Aberdeenshire, lost on penalties to Fraserburgh, but still reached a cup final. So they'll be looking for more of the same. I mean, they also won at Harmsworth Park a fortnight ago, so 3-0 in the league. So that would suggest they're capable of going up and doing it again. But if Wick produce what they showed last week in the Scottish Cup, where they were more resolute defensively, and also when the chances came along they took them, then they've got a great chance of getting through. The one last thing to say with that game as well is potentially a debut for Aidan Coombe for Martin, having signed from Fraserburgh last week and eligible to play in the Scottish Cup, but he can play on Saturday. And I mean, he's a player who I think will add a lot to Martin. He's won a lot in his time at Fraserburgh, but sort of this season and for chunks of last season maybe didn't play as regularly as he would have liked and wasn't able to quite show his best form. So I think for him a change potentially and just getting a sort of fresh start and a run at it, he could turn out to be a very shrewd signing for Martin.
Okay then, well that's it for this week's Highland League Weekly Friday preview. Just a reminder again, the main game this weekend, which will have highlights and reaction from on Monday at 7 PM on the Press and Journal, is Turriff United against Brecon City at the Hacks. The second game is Brora Rangers against Inverurie from Dudgeon Park. Enjoy the football, whichever games you're watching this weekend.